So we're going to finish the 17th chapter of A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court by Mark Twain, A Royal Banquet. Sandy and our narrator are in the castle of Morgan Le Fay. Sandy has helped a couple of people get pardoned by saying how powerful our narrator is, and now they are going to inspect the cell of a man who is being tortured on the rack for being identified as somebody who killed a deer in the royal forest. So that is where we will pick up. As I entered the rack cell, I caught a picture that will not go from me. I wish it would. A naive young giant of 30 or thereabouts lay stretched upon the frame on his back, with his wrists and ankles tied to ropes which led over windlasses at either end. There was no color in him. His features were contorted and set, and sweat drops stood upon his forehead. A priest bent over him on each side. The executioner stood by. Guards were on duty. Smoking torches stood in sockets along the walls. In a corner crouched a poor young creature, her face drawn with anguish, half wild and hunted look in her eyes, and in her lap lay a little child asleep. Just as we stepped across the threshold, the executioner gave his machine a slight turn, which wrung a cry from both the prisoner and the woman. But I shouted, and the executioner released the strain without waiting to see who spoke. I could not let this horror go on. It would have killed me to see it. I asked the Queen to let me clear the place and speak to the prisoner privately. And when she was going to object, I spoke in a low voice and said I did not want to make a scene before her servants, but I must have my way, for I was King Arthur's representative, and was speaking in his name. She saw she had to yield. I asked her to endorse me to these people, and then leave me. It was not pleasant for her, but she took the pill, and went even further than I was meaning to require. I only wanted the backing of her own authority, but she said, Ye will do in all things as this lord shall command. It is the boss. It was certainly a good word to conjure with. You could see it by the squirming of these rats. The Queen's guards fell in line, and she, as they marched away with their torch-bearers, and woke the echoes of the cavernous tunnels with the measured beat of their retreating footfalls, I had the prisoner taken from the rack and placed upon his bed, the medicaments applied to the hurts, and wine given him to drink. The woman crept near and looked on, eagerly, lovingly, but timorously, like one who fears a repulse. Indeed, she tried furtively to touch the man's forehead and jumped back, the picture of fright. When I turned unconsciously toward her, it was pitiful to see. Lord, I said. Stroke him, lass, if you want to. Do anything you've a mind to. Don't mind me. Why, her eyes were as grateful as an animal's when you do it a kindness that it understands. The baby was out of the way, and she had her cheek against the man's in a minute, and her hands fondling his hair, and her happy tears running down. The man revived and caressed his wife with his eyes, which was all he could do. I judged I might clear the den now, and I did. Cleared it of all but the family and myself. Then I said, Now, my friend, tell me your side of the matter. I know the other side. The man moved his head in a sign of refusal, but the woman looked pleased, as it seemed to me, pleased with my suggestion. I went on, You know of me? Yes, all do in Arthur's realms. If my reputation has come to you right and straight, you should not be afraid to speak. The woman broke in eagerly. Ah, my fair lord, do thou persuade him. Thou canst, and thou wilt. Ah, he suffereth so, and it is for me, and how can I bear it? I would I might see him die a sweet, swift death. Oh, my Hugo, I cannot bear this one. And she fell to sobbing and groveling about my feet, and still imploring what? The man's death? I could not get the bearings of the thing, but Hugo interrupted her and said, Peace. You will not you wit not what you ask. Shall I starve whom I love to win a gentle death? I wend thou knewest me better. Well, I said, I can't quite make this out. It is a puzzle now. Ah, my dear lord, and you will but persuade him. Consider how these his tortures wound me. Oh, and he will not speak, whereas the healing, the solace that lie in a blessed swift death. What are you mandering about? He's going out from here a free man and whole. He's not going to die." The man's white face lit up, and the woman flung herself at me in a most surprising explosion of joy and cried out, "He is saved! For it is the king's word by the mouth of the king's servant, Arthur, the king whose word is gold." "Well, then, you do believe I can be trusted after all. Why didn't you before?" "Who doubted?" "Who doubted? Not I, indeed, and not she. Well, why wouldn't you tell me your story, then?" "You made no promise. Else had it been otherwise." I see, and yet I believe I don't quite see after all. You stood the torture and refused to confess, which shows plain enough to even the dullest understanding that you had nothing to confess. "I, my lord? How so? It was I that killed the deer." "You did? Oh dear, this is the most mixed-up business that ever— Dear Lord, I begged him on my knees to confess, but—" "You did? It gets thicker and thicker. What did you want him to do that for?" "Sith it would bring him a quick death and save him all this cruel pain." "Well, yes, there is reason in that, but he didn't want the quick death. Why, of a surety he did." "Well, then, why in the world didn't he confess?" "Ah, sweet sir, and leave my wife and chick without bread and shelter?" "Oh, heart of gold, now I see it. The bitter law takes the convicted man's estate and beggars his widow and his orphans. They could torture you to death, but without conviction or confession they could not rob your wife and baby. You stood by them like a man, and you, true wife and true woman that you are, you would have bought him release from torture at cost to yourself, of slow starvation and death. Well, it humbles a body to think what your sex can do when it comes to self-sacrifice. I'll book you both for my colony. You'll like it there. It's a factory where I'm going to turn a groping and grumbling automata into men." And that is the end of chapter 17.